So we're not even 15 days into the new year, and already college football likely got not only the biggest story, but the biggest headline they'll get in the entirety of 2024. And that's that Alabama head coach Nick Saban has retired, something that took the nation by surprise, but something we need to talk about today, as well as talk about some names that are being mentioned to possibly replace the GOAT. Before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I've got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes, N for no. Were you surprised that Nick Saban retired? And let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. As those interactions seem small, they are massive to content creators such as myself. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And where do we begin whenever we're talking about a moment such as this? Nick Saban, the greatest of all time, retires from the game. And first and foremost, we need to give flowers where flowers are due. And we've talked about it on this channel all the time, how great Nick Saban is, but we really need to try and quantify it. We're talking about a coach that went 297-71. We're talking about a coach with 7 national championships, 11 SEC championships, 5-time SEC Coach of the Year, just to talk about some of the accolades he's racked up. But how about a coach that went 11-1 in SEC championship games? Something that quite frankly seems unfathomable when you're talking about some of the teams he's had to face in these SEC championship games. From some of those Georgia Bulldog teams to the Tim Tebow Florida Gators. Nick Saban's career has been such a joy to watch and get to see firsthand. And we are all, as college football fans, lucky to have been able to experience it. Because as I said on Bleacher Report yesterday, as I said on the SEC Connect last night, greatness only comes around so often. Now, we ascribe things to be great. We say this or that is great, and maybe a moment is great. But true greatness, that only comes around once every so often. And ladies and gentlemen, we just saw the end of an era and the end of a coaching career that qualifies as truly great, and that is none other than Nick Saban. So it absolutely caught me by surprise that he retired. In fact, just the other day, I believe on Tuesday, I said at the end of our live stream that I would be taking a few days off to try and catch up on some things I'd gotten behind on after I had to go visit family for Christmas. I needed to try and catch up with some things around the house. But that would only be barring if there was massive news. Well, as I'm doing some stuff around the house yesterday, cleaning up from a massive windstorm we got here, I get some text messages from none other than people at Bleacher Report asking if I can come on and do a stream about the news that has broke. Turns out that news was Nick Saban retiring. So it absolutely caught me by surprise. I went from not knowing to being in front of a camera live talking about it on Bleacher Report within 15 minutes and didn't even really know what to say or how to approach this subject because it is that big. For someone that loves college football and is an Alabama fan like myself, it truly is that big. So what does this mean for Alabama going forward? We could talk for days and for hours about the accolades of Nick Saban, what made him so great, whether that was his coaching ability, whether that was his recruiting ability, or something that I talk about all the time, his ability to adapt, which in my opinion, not many of his predecessors or peers have quite frankly been able to match, and he was doing it into his 60s and 70s, almost like he was a 30 to 40-year-old head coach. So what comes next for Alabama? Well, you've already heard the rumor mill going. Dan Lanning is a hot name. Lane Kiffin's a name to watch. You've heard some things about Steve Sarkisian. I'm interested in hearing from all of you who you would like to see as Alabama's next head coach. We're going to kind of go through the list and talk about why they make sense or why they may not. We'll start with Dan Lanning because that seems to be the name everybody is talking about. You had the is he in Tuscaloosa, is he not in Tuscaloosa saga last night, which quite frankly was wild. But Dan Lanning would make a lot of sense. He understands the SEC landscape. He has worked at Alabama under Nick Saban, then defensive coordinator at Georgia, and now has head coaching experience at Oregon, where he has been very successful. And I know the one caveat to that people will say is he hasn't won the big games and he hasn't beaten his rivals at the rate you would want him to. And while that's not untrue, my only response to that would be he hasn't been a head coach for very long. And I understand that's not an excuse that you can use forever, but I also think we need to talk about the trajectory and upside of Dan Lanning. Because while that may be true, he's also been going up against some pretty experienced coaches in a lot of those games. I mean, you're talking about Utah with Kyle Whittingham. You're talking about Kellen DeBoer at Washington. Lincoln Riley, no matter how you feel about him, is a guy that has college football playoff experience. Being a young coach, he's gone up against some very seasoned coaches that have played in big games. I think when we're talking about Dan Lanning, what we need to understand is the upside here. The fact that, like I said, he understands the SEC landscape, and the fact that he is an ace recruiter. And for Alabama, once Nick Saban retired, there's a 30-day window around this team for the guys to enter the transfer portal and find a new home, which is why you've seen so many reports where Nick Saban told the players, wait 72 hours before you make those decisions to allow us to put together a package and to try and find a head coach for all of you. That's why it's imperative that Alabama moves quickly, because you have a lot of talent on this team and you need to keep it together. Dan Lanning is a name that, in my opinion, would move the needle. He is a name that would cause excitement because of all the factors I said, the fact that he's young, and in theory, these younger coaches can relate to players, and the fact that he can recruit with the best of them. Look at what he's been able to do for Oregon recruiting, not only traditionally so, but also in the transfer portal. Dan Lanning is certainly a name to watch. If we're talking about reasons it may not happen, he has a massive buyout at $20 million right now, but in my opinion, if you're Alabama and you're serious, you need to pony up and start throwing around some big boy money to try and get a coach that you like. Moving forward to Lane Kiffin, a name that in theory makes sense because of his past affiliation with the University of Alabama. However, it didn't end on the best of notes. That being said, Lane Kiffin is somebody who any opportunity he gets to troll Alabama in jest, he takes, but simultaneously, he's the first guy to stick up for the GOAT. He was the first guy, whenever Jimbo Fisher started talking crazy, that went on the offensive for Nick Saban. It almost seemed like Jimbo Fisher had attacked Lane Kiffin as well. Lane Kiffin has the familiarity with the SEC, having coached at Ole Miss and done so quite successfully. He's taken Ole Miss to a top 15 program in the nation, and they're a team to watch this upcoming season with all the talent he's been able to pull in from the transfer portal. I also think, like Dan Lanning, this would be a guy that would excite some in the Alabama fan base because of his youth, because of his experience, and because, quite frankly, he's an offensive mastermind. I think the biggest questions with Lane Kiffin is the instability he's had in his past, the fact that he has left some of the jobs he's been at and the manner he has left them. Tuscaloosa has been an absolute beacon for consistency under Nick Saban, and as much as you might love Lane Kiffin, as great of a coach as I think he is, he hasn't exactly been a beacon of consistency, and so it would almost be opposing viewpoints going at it, which I find to be fascinating. Lane Kiffin, certainly a name to watch, though. Steve Sarkisian has gotten some early press. And while I think Steve Sarkisian makes sense because, once again, and as you'll notice the theme here, he's got the affiliations with the University of Alabama, he understands the SEC landscape, and he coached under Nick Saban, I think he's got a good thing going at Texas. Look, at the very least right now, Steve Sarkisian is being viewed as the guy that is getting the Texas Longhorns back on the right track. And in my opinion, that's a big thing. He is being viewed as someone who could bring Texas, quote-unquote, back, and having made it to a college football playoffs, hard to imagine that he's not well on his way, or that they aren't at least back in terms of competing at a high level. So while Steve Sarkisian makes a lot of sense, the question we would have to ask ourselves is, would he leave a massive program like the Texas Longhorns that could pay him whatever he wanted, where he's already being viewed as a guy that's turning them in a positive direction? And remember, this is a Texas program that after Mac Brown has known nothing but ups and downs and, quite frankly, a lot of disappointment. Steve Sarkisian is being viewed as the guy that's getting them out of that. Would he leave Texas to go back to Alabama. Something interesting to think about, but I know a lot of Alabama fans would be happy to have him because what Steve Sarkisian did at Texas that was so impressive to me is assemble an incredible staff there. When you looked at who he got for offensive line coach, who he got for defensive line coach in Bo Davis, who he got for all of these position coaches, he assembled a great staff, which is always enticing. A name that hasn't been getting as much press, but I think is super intriguing, is Washington head coach Kellen DeBoer. Kellen DeBoer has only known success in college football. When you look at his win-loss record, it's actually kind of crazy how much success he's known and how little the national guys really give him flowers. This is a fantastic coach. He just coached in a national championship game, and yes, it didn't go his way, but the guy can coach his tail off. So why would he make sense? Well, he's got college football experience. He has been very successful, and Alabama would be willing to pay him a bunch of money to come there. Why would it kind of not make sense? Because he hasn't been in the SEC landscape, right? The majority of his coaching experience has been spent elsewhere. And even though I think he could make that transition, that is something we have to think about. So we're going to be keeping by to see any news that comes out of Tuscaloosa. Later this afternoon, I'm going to be linking up with other Bama content creators, and we will be going live on this channel to kind of talk about any news that's broke through the day, talk about possible head coaches that could take over for Nick Saban, what happens with key members of the staff, what happens with the recruiting class. If you're interested in all that, be sure to check out this channel around 4:15 this afternoon Central Standard Time for a live stream where we're going to be chopping it up. More information will be coming soon. Be sure to check out the community tab for that. Until then, hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes. Are you surprised Nick Saban is retired? And then let me know the guys you would like to see take over for him at the job. That's it. See ya.